Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I am Malki Rodrigo from SEVANATHA Urban Resource Centre, and I'll be moderating this session. Thank you for joining the Research Launch Workshop for Inclusive Urban Infrastructure for Underserved Communities in Sri Lanka. We have an interesting program for you with a number of experts speaking. We will start with three opening speakers who will each speak for about 10 minutes, and then we will move on to the details of the project. We have 15 minutes for comments, questions, and answers session at the end. First, let's start with our first speaker, Professor Michael Collier. He is the principal investigator for the project at the University of Sussex. Unfortunately, he is unable to attend due to a sudden commitment, but he has sent a video recording about the broad research, its significance, and objectives, along with his past wishes.
Hi everyone. I'm really sorry I can't join you today in person or even directly live online, but I'm very grateful for the CMRD team for making it possible for me to actually speak to you. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the project as a whole, which includes 3 other countries in addition to Sri Lanka. The project is called Towards Trajectories of Inclusion, Making Infrastructure Work for the Most Marginalised, which gets at the sense of what we want to talk about. Although for the website that title was a bit too long, so we're working with a shorter title of Inclusive Urban Infrastructure, which essentially gets to what we want to focus on in fewer words. So for the website, we're going to use Inclusive Urban Infrastructure. It's funded by the UK's Economic and Social Research Council for 3 years, starting in September last year and running to September 2023. And as I say, it's working in 4 countries, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Zimbabwe, and Somaliland, in addition to a number of people in the UK team. The research isn't focused at all of those countries. In each country, we're selecting 6 particular neighbourhoods that have been chosen to be comparative across the 4 countries. All of the neighbourhoods are low income, known as slums in some places, but it builds on a previous project, which was called Migrants on the Margins, in which we looked at the role of migrants and migration into these areas. So these are neighbourhoods which in some cases have significant in-migration from elsewhere in the country. This isn't international migration. This project is not specifically focused at migration itself, but because we're building on the previous project, there will be some significant migration in some of the neighbourhoods where we're working. As I said, each country team has selected 6 neighbourhoods. 2 of those are the same neighbourhoods that they worked with in this previous project, Migrants on the Margins. 2 more are new neighbourhoods in the same city. In each case, we're working primarily in the capital city of those 4 countries, and then 2 neighbourhoods outside of the capital city. So 4 neighbourhoods in the capital city and 2 elsewhere, somewhere else in the country. So we get some sort of comparison about whether this is an effect largely resulting from the significance of the capital city. We can compare it to what's going on elsewhere in the country. The project has 3 broad objectives. Firstly, we're focusing on those neighbourhoods themselves, on those 24 neighbourhoods. We want to establish what the patterns of access to basic services are. And we're interested in 6 services, 6 infrastructure grids, as we're referring to them in the project. Housing, and then 5 other forms of services, which are water, sanitation, energy, communication, and transport. In each location, we're looking at the same forms of infrastructure. We want to use a major survey, which is currently going on in all 4 countries, to try to map out the patterns of inclusion and exclusion We also want to look at some sort of historical trajectory to try to work out what is it that determines who is included and who is excluded. Using that survey, we're going to select 2 forms of infrastructure in each country, and they won't necessarily be the same. It will be up to the country teams to select those, and then go beyond the neighbourhood to look at how these services, how these forms of infrastructure are delivered to these very poor urban neighbourhoods, to try to work out exactly where the decisions are made, where the processes that result in these forms of inclusion or exclusion happen, whether this is public service delivery or private service delivery, how the two intersect, what is the role of international organisations where they have a role, what is the role of community groups, as well as other forms of governance structure. So we want to map that out and try to work out where these significant nodes, the significant places where these decisions are made. And finally, the third aim is to develop some sort of small but hopefully innovative solution to try to address some of these patterns of inclusion or exclusion in one of these neighbourhoods in each of the 4 countries. This won't attempt to solve the problem as a whole, but what we're hoping will be that this will involve some sort of demonstration effect, so we can experiment and see if our research can have some practical impact in improving the situation on the ground. In each country, we're working with a non-academic partner, and in Sri Lanka, we're delighted to be working with SEVANATHA to help with this demonstration, this practical intervention. The research questions that we have, 3 research questions, map onto these 3 objectives. First, we're interested in how these key infrastructures, these 6 forms of infrastructure that I mentioned, are delivered: water, sanitation, energy, transport, communication, as well as housing, for people in these very low income neighbourhoods. Secondly, we're interested in how these systems of provision, how the services are delivered, vary from one neighbourhood to another, and how they vary from the 4 neighbourhoods we're working with in the capital city to neighbourhoods outside of the capital city. And thirdly and finally, we're interested in how provision can be extended to residents of these neighbourhoods that are currently excluded. In order to do this, we're using a huge range of methods. We're trying to find out as much as possible about the neighbourhoods where we're working, these 24 neighbourhoods, historically, as well as all of the connections they have with other places. We've conducted focus groups, often using quite innovative methods because the pandemic prevented us doing a lot of community contact. I mentioned household survey, which is going on at the moment. In some cases, that's face-to-face. In other cases, it's using mobile phones to reduce the risk to the communities that we're working with. We're going to follow up those household surveys with smaller focused panel surveys, as well as qualitative interviews. We're holding a number of meetings with key stakeholders and interviews with those stakeholders. We'll also be working with photography, asking different groups to use photography to identify things that they're particularly proud of in terms of infrastructure provision in their neighbourhoods, and things that they think could be improved around infrastructure in their neighbourhoods. We're also working with comics as a form of methodology for discussing these issues, but also as one of our key outputs, so we can communicate some of these findings to a range of different people. And finally, the supported intervention that I mentioned is also a form of methodology, although we hope that it will be useful to demonstrate some of the things which could be done in these neighbourhoods if our research was more widely taken up. And finally, the outputs, I mentioned some of them. The main output that we hope to build up to is this intervention, to use this to demonstrate some of the possibilities about what could be done in these neighbourhoods if the broader support was available. We hope to engage with a whole variety of stakeholders, including people who live in the neighbourhoods, community groups in the neighbourhoods, up to urban forms of governance, public, private organisations, international organisations, and the broader academic community. We hope to use our website, which has just come online, to communicate some of those activities to media, to academic audiences. There'll be blog posts, the comics that I mentioned will be on there, photos from Photo Voice, and of course, being academics, academic journal articles are a key form of dissemination for us to other academics and people working on these issues. So thank you very much indeed for taking an interest in this project. Thank you for coming along today. We hope to be engaged with you throughout this process, throughout the next 2 or more years of the project, and we hope that you'll find the approach and the results of this project interesting. Please do get in touch with me, Mike Collier, if you would like any further information, but I'm sure the CMRD team are more than happy to provide the information that you need. So I hope the session today is interesting. Once again, I'm really sorry not to be joining you, but I hope to be in Sri Lanka again very soon, and I'll meet some of you then, I hope. Thanks a lot.
Our second speaker is Dr. Rajit Lakshman, who is a research fellow at the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex and a co-investigator for the research. He will speak about cities, poverty, and development. Over to you, Dr. Lakshman.
Thanks, Malki, and thanks for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here online. It's been a challenging journey for the whole team coming up to this point, but we are here finally presenting launching our project and introducing it to you. So yeah, move on to the next slide, please. Yeah. So basically, I'm trying to the purpose of my presentation is to discuss key concepts and debates around cities, poverty, and development. And I'd like to focus that discussion on issues relevant for the project, the Inclusive Urban Infrastructure Project. So in this presentation, I will cover some of the definitions, basic definitions, but important ones nevertheless, and also look at urbanization trends globally and see where things are headed, and also look at connecting urbanization with economic growth and development, how that's done in the literature, and also how poverty and informality in urban settings are connected to accessing basic services, which is, as Mike just mentioned to you, basic services are a central part of our research. So I'll give a few hints about that. Next one. Next slide, please. Yeah. So about defining the cities, countries across the world are defining their cities in different ways. Urban settlements are defined differently in various countries. Australia, Burkina Faso, and Pakistan, example that I have shown here, does it in different ways. So it's a kind of a challenge for researchers like us when comparative statistics aren't available because of this reason. For our my presentation today, I'd like to define what urban population is. That's the number of people living in urban areas. What urban population growth is, which is the rate at which the urban population is growing. And then there are other definitions that are used in the literature. For example, what urbanization level is, which is share of population that is urban. Urbanization rate, which is the rate at which the share of population that is urban is growing. All of these are slightly connected and related and quite easy to mix up. So it's very, very important that we know which variable we are looking at when we are looking at data. Next slide, please. So in this slide, I'm presenting data from World Urbanization Prospectus 2018, global population historical data, as well as projections up to 2050. The data is divided into four between more developed regions and less developed regions, as well as urban and rural. And the key bit is the less developed regions and urban areas in those less developed regions. That's colored in red. So almost all population growth in the next 30 years is said to happen in urban, less developed regions. That's the challenge for us. Most of the increase will be in developing Asia and Africa. So the red bit that you see there, most of that will happen in Asia and Africa. Asia, for example, in 2000, the population, the urban population was 1.3 billion, and it's projected to go up to 3.4 billion in 2015. Similarly, in Africa. So these statistics and projections have rung alarm bells across various sectors. But also importantly, given that this is 2018 report, I've also looked at what World Cities report, which is more recent, had looked at, which also reiterates that despite the pandemic, which is more urban-related issue, it is not likely to significantly change these demographic projections. So what I presented in this graph is still holds as what's projected. So economically, politically, and socially and environmentally, this will be an enormous shift for particularly for Asian and African countries. So the same data here, looked at from a different perspective. If you can remember, the previous data was 5 yearly population data, and here we are presenting information on using the same data, annualized growth in population, urban population in the world, as well as Africa and Asia. And here the picture is less dramatic and less fear enticing. For example, you can see that the growth rates have plateaued and in fact are going down gradually, which is kind of saying that the urban transition, which we are worried about, is winding down now. And so words such as exploding, unprecedented, etc., which are often used in conjunction with to describe urban situation, is not warranted. So that's something that to take away from this particular graph. But the concerns are real. I mean, people, the policymakers on the ground, particularly in those African and Asian countries, are worried. For example, governments with policies to lower rural-urban migration is increasing. In Asia, in 1976, only 75% of the countries had such policies, whereas by 2030 it has increased to 84%. In Africa, the rate has increased more than nearly double and, during the same period. So it's a worrying trend. It illustrates that the policymakers and the government are worried about this. But of course, a slight aside, the rural-urban migration is in fact not the main reason why urban populations are growing. So it's not surprising, but it's something to highlight. That despite that, the focus on rural-urban migration in terms of urbanization, these numbers are driven by natural population increases. Can you move on, please? So this is so is urbanization good for the economy? So the economic argument is around agglomeration economies, which are basically arguing that matching, sharing, and learning, which as I've described here, are the reasons why urbanization leads to, because of these things, urbanization can lead to better economic productivity, etc. But this way of looking at it completely ignores social and environmental dimensions that are extremely important for this. For example, urban coalition and the politics of cities as growth machines, which is yeah, described by Logan and Malak, um, kind of emphasizes those social backdrop, as a critical element. So the conflict between those who were interested in the city for exchange value and those for whom the city is a place to live, um, or has use value for the city, are critical in identifying these differences. Yeah, let's move on. So urbanization, poverty, and access to services. That's what I'm going to look at now. The data I'm presenting is from Little 2017, basically showcasing that urban service access, for example, electricity, is much better than rural versions. And concurrently, urban poverty is much less than rural poverty in the same country, for example. So the table basically compiles information on access to services and poverty levels for 137 middle and low income countries using World Development Indicators. Yeah, so it's known that urban transformation is associated with millions of people being lifted out of poverty. But concurrently, these transformations, that is, urban transformations, are linked to entrenching inequalities and accelerating climate change. Inclusive urbanization, a concept that's very frequently used in New Urban Agenda of the UN 2016, is a central tenet in terms of addressing poverty issues, as well as providing more inclusive access to services. And the services picture is central, as I told you, to our research. Can you move on, please? I think I'm a bit behind. So this is the last slide. I don't have a conclusion, mainly because it's a collection of ideas and concepts I just want to float around. So about informality and access to services, that's what I'm going to talk about now. So the evidence of urbanization without growth in sub-Saharan Africa is quite strong. It's unrefutable now, in fact. And because of so urbanization is happening, more and more people are living in cities, but growth is not happening in those places, which means the living conditions are going to be dire. So that which is the explanation for why spread of informal settlements and dependence of informal work cannot be avoided in cities because of this reason. So yeah, just to emphasize that, as I have the diagram shows, um, eviction is a critical component here, affected by, I mean, the informal settlements are affected by eviction in a bad way. They don't have a lot of say in when they are evicted. So this data is from informal settlements, 6 informal settlements in India. You can see the red dots are those people who have experienced eviction previously, and quite a lot of them in some sites, but less so in other sites. But more importantly, those who have such experiences have demonstrably less well-being outcomes, as we have shown in this paper. It came out in a global report on internal displacement 2019 as a background paper. But yeah, so it's the same kind of thing that we are interested in our current project as well. Not so much on eviction, but about how service access and yeah, related issues are relevant. I think I'll stop there. And yeah, I'm not going to, as I told you, I'm not going to summarize this, but hopefully some of the concepts we can discuss later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lakshman. If you have any questions related to what was discussed, please leave them in the chat box and we'll be taking them during the Q&A session. Allow me to introduce our next speaker, Mr. K.A. Jayaratna, who is the president of SEVANATHA Urban Resource Centre. He will speak about urban housing, underserved communities, basic services and challenges in Sri Lanka. Over to you, Mr. Jayaratna.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can hear me, Malki.
Yes, Mr. Jayaratna, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for inviting me to present at this launching meeting of the research. I'm very briefly make an overview of urban housing, underserved communities and basic services and challenges, particularly focusing on the Colombo.
Excuse me, Mr. Jayaratna, can you switch on your slides? Can you share your slides, please?
One second. Can you see the slides now?
Not yet.
Wow.
If you can, oh yeah, we can see it now.
Okay. I'm going to briefly present the urban housing, underserved communities and basic services, particularly focusing on the Colombo situation. And I have several slides that I will use only to give some ideas, but I'm not going to talk about it. But this is my presentation is basically, how Sri Lanka had a kind of a proper progressive housing policy over the last 40 years, and also the current situation, how the pattern of inclusion and also some kind of exclusion is taking place in this sector. Okay, and housing sector, mainly they are looking at the inadequate housing, water, sanitation and underserved settlement, and tenure security, eviction and the resettlements. So if you look at the concentration of housing, mainly in the Western province in Sri Lanka, it is about 28%. But the land area of the Western province is nearly 6%. From that you can see how the concentration is taking place. And through this picture also you see that the density is increasing, mainly Colombo and in and around, but it decrease towards the outer part of the city. And the slums, according to the UN Habitat definition, it says that if the lack of one or more of the following, then we can say it is slums. That is the access to water, sanitation, and durability of housing, and also the living space, and also the security of tenure. And in Sri Lanka, we have used several typologies to understand the low-income settlements or underserved settlements. In 80s, actually, we had a typology to understand the underserved settlements called slum shanties, and also the upgraded and resettled settlements. And then there was some old work-up apartments, and also we call the line houses, so employee quarters, and unplanned permanent houses. These categories comes under the underserved settlement. And when we say slum, this is an example in Colombo. I have taken, this is from the Q Lane in Panchakavat area. So where you see that these are subdivided old houses built back to back, but interesting thing is each person has their the tenure security. The shanties are mainly built illegally on state land or private land, and with the temporary material. The interesting part is the shanty dwellers does not have the security of tenure. So these are the old the typology. But SEVANATHA actually in 2001 and also 2012, we use another typology based on the poverty characteristic. Based on that, we have identified 4 types of underserved settlements. We call the extreme poor, underserved, upgraded, and the fully upgraded settlements. And these the typology is based on the poverty characteristic. You can see from these slides, there are 16 characters, and each character got 4 or 5 weighted indicators, and based on that we have identified the underserved settlement in the city of Colombo. This was done in 2012. You can see that the total number of settlements was 1,735. Out of that, 30 of nearly 40% are fully upgraded settlement. That means because of the progressive policies in the past, these people have improved their housing, and as housing and the infrastructure concerned, the government or the state does not have to do much. And other thing is extreme poor community. You see that we found only 6 communities based on that criteria. But the thing is, what we have to see in terms of provision of amenities and also the condition of housing, the situation is not so bad compared with other the countries. So this is the result of that urban poor survey in 2012. And these are the 1 or 2 examples when you say the land ownership of settlements, where also you can find that about 40% of the household, they own their own land. This cannot be seen in some other countries, and mainly it's a matter of improving their tenure security. And at the same time, the most of the people, about 43%, the people have their ownership under the category called freehold ownership, and illegal occupancy and also the rental housing is about 30%. So this is the similar pattern you can see in outside the Colombo, like Moroto municipality, and you can see the number of settlements, and also the like Kalutara MC, also underserved settlement. You can see the number of units are small because of the population is small, and number of settlements are very small number. Looking at these pictures or the data, major concern in Sri Lanka, the high density in and around Colombo and along the main roads. You see that the concentration is mainly in Colombo and also along the main roads. And then the lack of basic services and employment opportunities is a concern of the people. Even now under this the pandemic situation for last 2 years, the major concern in these people are the coming to the sometimes the basic services and also the livelihood. And then other one, when the people are living along the main roads, but they have to commute to the cities, then they have the not sufficient transport facilities. And also, similarly, you can see that other concerns on the underserved settlements. So this is a quick overview that I want to show you when we consider about the underserved settlement. Actually, prior to the 1970, the situation was very bad. In Colombo, about 50% of the population were living under the slum and shanties situation, and also they were considered as illegal settlers, and there was no the basic services. But from 70 to 77, you know, there was a progressive government. There was a land the reform in rural areas as well as in urban areas. They had the ceiling on housing property law. Because of that, the tenants got the ownership of their the houses, especially in slums. They got the ownership, and also other areas, the government form separate institutions to provide the services to address this the problems of the underserved settlements. But more progressive things you can see from the 78 to 95, where especially the UDA took the slum and shanties as a separate development component of the urban development, where they carried out the enumeration surveys citywide and also they developed the housing typologies, as I mentioned earlier, and developed the progressive policy. And where they introduced the urban upgrading policy, based on that, settlements identify where they can do the permanent upgrading on site, temporary upgrading, and also the on-site relocation, and also the settlements which can be resettled in other part of the city. In doing the upgrading, the major components was also important. Once you identify settlements, the first thing they did the community organization, and also to improve the tenure security and provide the basic services. And in order to get the people build their own housing, according to the urban development law, provided the housing assistance in terms of loans. So since I have limited time, I will say that the main community organization in these settlements were the community development councils, which you know, this picture, and also it shows how the people have organized and they conduct the monthly CDC meetings. And CDC was the local level institution which has a link with the government and also the local authority, NGO, and other agencies. And so in Colombo, actually, in 90s, during that time, all the settlements, they had the community development councils at the settlement level, district level, and also the city level. It's called Housing and Community Development Council, which was actually chaired by the mayor. Through this process, people had the opportunity to participate with the local authority to identify their priorities and also to get the support from the local authorities. So the tenure security also was important through this process. Earlier, the government tried to give the leasehold right, but gradually the people got the freehold right. And also once they have allocated a piece of land, the municipality has given the assessment number, and also they are liable to pay the assessment tax. But when it comes to like 2000, year 2000, actually we don't see much the tenure security problem in the underserved settlements. So the provision of basic infrastructure, since we are talking about the inclusive infrastructure, the provisions, under this progressive housing program, most of the infrastructure was provided. Actually, it was changed from common to private facilities, and that include the water, toilet, electricity, drains, waste management, and these infrastructure were built through the community contract system. And people's priority were identified through the community action planning process, where you can see that the authorities and the people get together and have the community level workshops to identify their priorities. And also then they offer the community contract system to build their infrastructure. So this is one community I would like to say, how the people on underserved settlements, they identify their community priorities through community action planning program. And you can read their major priorities. And also in the same community, they got, the water supply. Even their houses are temporary, but they got the private water connection with the meter through this process. This is actually not happening in other countries, but in Sri Lanka you can find. And also through the community contract system, they build their main drains and also the back alleys, and also they negotiate with the electricity board to get the connection and pay over a period of 12 months or 18 months. And similarly, they got improved by themselves the inner access road. And also, when it comes to a fully upgraded settlement in Colombo, these are the situation you see that over through a kind of a progressive pro-poor housing policy, the most people got the tenure security and they built houses with the permanent material. And also there was a high level of social mobility, and they were less vulnerable to various other eviction and kind of the situations. So these are the kind of infrastructure that built through the community contract construction system. Actually, this is a good example how you can build the infrastructure in an inclusive way in a urban poor settlements. And this is another way how the people are so active once they have the community contract system. Actually, under this pandemic situation, one of the things the government also can think about how to get the people involved in the infrastructure provisions, because their major problems nowadays is the livelihood. So these are some of the community contracts actually carried out by SEVANATHA in 2013 and 14, and where we got the support from the municipal council and also the other the government agencies. And by the way, what I want to say, there's two processes where how things are happening. In the formal process, you think about first the legal tenure and put the infrastructure and build houses, and then ask the people to move on. But the progressive housing policy support actually the informal process, where people move first to the land and build their houses, then they get the infrastructure, and finally they ask for the legal tenure. So this is the past things, and also the current scenario is little bit different, because now we have gone from a kind of a top-down approach, and the government has built and also going to build high-rise building, mainly they says for all the low-income people in Colombo and also the other areas, where you see that the high-rise building have been built over the last 3-4 years, and this is a very expensive, and also the cost recovery is very low. And the livelihood is in this kind of apartment housing arrangement is a little bit difficult. So this has been done in the past. These are not very high rise, these are walk-up apartments. If the people are not involved and in this process, it is not inclusive, you can see this kind of a situation is will happen. So even in high-rise buildings also, what we can expect in the coming years, whether we have to question whether we are the supporting to build the kind of a vertical slums. So these are the current situation, but the major challenges in this situation is the change of the government the policies. You can see from my presentation how it has changed from 70s to up to now. And also currently what is happening is there's a lack of support for poor policies. It's more top-down kind of policy. And also there's a lack of power and resources. Increasingly, we see that at local level, more power and resources are available at the central level. And at the same time, this has created situation to reduce the capacity at the local level, because it's coming from the central level. And other thing is nowadays the upgrading or the owner-driven approach is considered like a temporary solutions, but upgrading is also sometimes they don't consider it is a empowerment process, but it's also considered as a delivery process. So thank you very much. I giving this opportunity, and I went very quickly to manage my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Jayaratna. Now we will move on to the research project with Dr. Danesh Jayatilaka, who is the co-investigator for the study. He leads the research at the CMRD and will give an introduction and background to the study conducted in Sri Lanka. Over to you, Dr. Jayatilaka.
Thank you, Malki. I want to thank Azam also for organizing this, and my colleagues, my research colleagues who are now online. Thank you, everyone. Mike has given a fairly rounded introduction about the project, but I'll go into more details. So it's a study to look at the different ways residents in low-income neighborhoods, how they access services. Our research is very quite innovative. We have a lot of methods, and it's a comparative study. We will be comparing sites and we will be comparing countries. One of the unique, we think, makes this research unique is the academic and the practitioner component. You just heard SEVANATHA speak. SEVANATHA is a practitioner. And then my colleagues, including myself, we are researchers, we are academics. So it's a combined academic and practitioner research. We'll go for 3 years, and what we find, we will share. Definitely an urban study, and we are working on cities and underserved communities. So we have 5 service areas that we will look at along with housing. And as Mike has said, it's 6 grids. 6 grids: housing, water, sanitation, transport, energy, and communication. We will be looking at the provision side, how the supply happens, and the consumption side, how the consumption happens, and in between. And while we do this, we will be looking at patterns using both quantitative techniques, qualitative techniques, and other methods. and this aspect of the inclusion outcomes, who will get and who will not. So we will cover state provisions, those by donors, non-government organizations, and the other interventions. So we have areas and theory. Areas I've said, one of the main important things about this study is this systems of provision, which we will use. It's called SOP. And this is where we look at a provision as a system, as a vertical system from supply to consumption. And in between, there are various factors like agents, relations, institutions, culture, all that come into play. So we're going to be investigating that quite deeply. Then, of course, the livelihoods and the well-being, like Rajat mentioned. The partners, I think you have an idea. It's SEVANATHA, CMRD, the IDS, University of Sussex is the main implementer. And we have other partners in 4 countries, along with University of Durham, SOAS, Positive Negative, and Slum and Shack Dwellers. The funding Mike has mentioned, it comes from the UK government's UKRI and the GCRA. Next slide. This is, so our research is, we hope, is in line with some of the major donors and the government, current government. So the World Bank in 2020 in their Infrastructure in Asia and the Pacific report highlighted this infrastructure, assets and services provided, the basic physical and organizational structures that underpin the functioning of the economy and society, and how important it is to extend these provisions equally, and the aspect of supply, the quality and affordability. The national policy framework, the Vistas of Prosperity and Splendor, the government, current government, they spoke of the new approach in national spatial systems, bridging the urban and rural gap by providing services and infrastructure facilities equally across the sectors of living. And in 2018, there was a very good report called The State of Sri Lankan Cities, and that spoke of the social and economic aspect of development in cities and the well-being that comes about with efficient and deliberative services. So to study this, we will be using community engagement, surveys, stakeholder engagements, photo voice, comics, and demonstration interventions, which I will go into more in detail. Next slide. Yeah, so we have 6 sites and types. Our sites are in Colombo, in Kandy, and in Badulla. The Colombo sites are Samantanapura, Nawagampura, Lunupokuna, and Salamulla. Mahiyava is in Kandy and Sania Estate is in Badulla. So these are different types. They include horizontal living spaces, vertical living spaces, and slope living spaces in urban, semi-urban, and estate locations. So this comparative element will be very useful for a comparative element. Next slide. And the 6 sites, they have really interesting profiles. Like Samantanapura was developed in 1976, Nawagampura 1985, Lunupokuna 1986, and these came through an approach called site and services approach, which Mr. Jayaratna, I think, maybe touched on. Then Salamulla is a flat. It was set up in 2017. It is a development-related resettlement. Then both Mahayava and Sania are administration and commercial-related locations. Sania, of course, is a tea estate. Next slide. This is our first horizontal urban location. This is Samantanapura in North Colombo. You can see it's by the river. So there's quite a bit of flooding that happens and may have gotten flooded, I think, last few days also. You can see some of the profile data. There's the density is about 637 people per hectare, and it's about half the people are economically active. It's a reasonably dense location. The aerial photographs, you can see 1965 and 2000, how the location was populated and it got filled up. Next slide. Our second horizontal urban space, this is Navagampura. I believe this is by the Kalani Road. So here, about the same amount of population density, and the economical activity just again about 50%. The aerial photographs show that in 1972 it was open space, and by 2007 the built structures had come in, and now it is quite almost fully built, except for this the grounds that is in the middle. Next slide. Our third horizontal urban place by the harbor, North Colombo. The triangle you see is actually where we will be looking at our community. We're not going to look at the whole entire that Lunupokun area. Here you can see population density, 1,000 per hectare, much more dense. It's a very tight place, and those who are economically active, just about 51%. Next slide. Now we go to another type, the vertical urbans. So this is the Salamula flat. There are 3 buildings there. They have 994 apartments. It's new, and we are gathering more information about the location. Okay. Here's the slope, semi-urban place in Mahia in Kandy. 2 identifiable places there. This is the Mahiyava MC and the Mahiyava modern town. Very, very dense. You can see population density 1,851 per hectare. Next slide. And our last one. This is the estate in Badulla. Actually, some of our team had been covering lots of research here recently. So there are 2 settlements here. You can see the tea factory on the left top, and this is Mahatan and Dotland. This is a typical estate, tea estate, people living in line houses. And you can see the density is very sparse, just 6.6 people per hectare. And the economic activity is just about 50%. Next slide. Yeah, so Mike spoke about the methods. We have actually about 14 techniques or methods that we will use in this research. They include the quantitative types, the qualitative, and others. And you can see, if you look at the top left, we've started with our community profiles, and we've been working through our focus groups. We have started this very large household survey, and then we will move into in-depth interviews, 300, which is quite a large number. Then the key informants, here, this is where we will start exploring that single infrastructure type and going into it. And the photo voice, and then there's a panel survey that will happen. Then there are the comics, and then will come the demonstration intervention that SEVANATHA will do. Based on our findings, it's strictly based on findings, and SEVANATHA, then the panel survey again, another panel survey. And you can see at the bottom, SEVANATHA is with us right from the beginning, from project year 1 to project year 3. They are hand in hand with us on this research. And there'll be 3 workshops and 1 final conference. Next slide. Just some indicative findings. We have been doing a little analysis, just a little, from our those few focus groups and some of the community profiles we developed. And These are the Colombo sites, the horizontal, the Navagampura, Lunupokuna, and Samantanapura. You can see where people are kind of happy. Energy, transport, communication, they were generally happy. Sanitation was quite problematic. They spoke about the bad smell, they spoke about the mosquitoes, the drainage, then the water, the velocity of the water was problematic. Next slide. Then here, Salamulla, the vertical living, the flat. Here, people were satisfied with communication, energy. Then they were neutral on transport, sanitation. Transport, I mean, there was a give and take. Sanitation also, there was a give and take. The fact that they all got toilets, but there was, sanitation issues, etc. The water was problematic because of the water quality and the fact that some of them had to tie cloths because the rust was coming. Next one. Here it's Mahiawa in Kandy. Generally quite satisfied with energy, transport, and communication, but sanitation was hugely problematic. There's significant problems there, etc. Yeah, next one. And this is Sania. So Sania, there was the sanitation, communication, they were neutral, but water was problematic because they just didn't have enough water. And this was an area that they said some support would be needed. Yeah, next one. So the members in our research team did some early analysis using a package, and they had this word clouds. You can see here, so this is indicative. This is just a simple analysis that Lunupokuna, Navagampura, Salamulla, what's coming prominently is housing issues and issues concerning housing. And Navagampura, you can see water is coming up next, and Salamulla, water is coming up next. Then for Sania, water is just there. It's the biggest problem. And when it comes to, we look at the 4 sites, this is 4 sites, just these 4 sites. It's issues concerning housing and water. Everything else sort of little bit goes into the background. Next slide. So like everyone else, we did face challenges, and these, of course, we had problems collecting our data. Nearly all of it was done on the phone and using smartphones and regular phones and Zooms, etc. We used a lot of networks and contacts to try and do what we could, and some innovative and creative techniques. So different sites needed different approaches because our resources on the ground were different, and we worked with multiple people, and we did do these things called family and household group sessions where it was safe, or we would do a focus group in separate houses using phone Zooms, which was difficult to organize, but we were able to do it. Next slide. So these are the outputs and dissemination. Mike spoke about them. There are 3 websites. There's the CMRD website, there's the SEVANATHA website, and there's the international website where all updates will be available and other information. Our partnerships, so there are implementers. You know, SEVANATHA is our key implementer here. Then there are collaborators, people we work with. We hope for some followers, people we can link up with, and we are looking for new networks. Then the events, it'll be the stakeholder workshops, the demonstration intervention, and there'll be a final conference. Publications are the books, briefs, blogs, journals, and as many of them will be translated to Sinhala and Tamil. Our communication, we have a dedicated office inside our research project, and there's one at international level at Sussex. One of the things I want to mention here is that We are looking to formulate a advisory observer group for this research, which can include the key sectors and actors. And here we hope that, because Mike spoke of the international organizations, the government, and then the other actors, that this cuts across that, and we will, and academics, etc., we will reach out to some candidates and hope they can be part of this group, so they can also be part of our research, and we can get advice from them, and they can hopefully learn from us and maybe support us also. Yeah, next slide. That's it. Thank you. Thank you. I'm finished. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Adilakar. Now, Mr. Uddenchuratna, the Executive Director of SEVANATHA, will speak about the innovative demonstration intervention that is to be conducted in the third year of the research. He will give a brief background about SEVANATHA first, and then move on to the details about the intervention. Mr. Churatna.
Thank you, Malki, and thank you, everyone. Ms. Hassan, can I have first? Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll start very briefly, talking about what is SEVANATHA. As most of you probably know that we are a local NGO established in 1989 with our main activities including community empowerment, community institutional building, and promoting participatory development approaches by working with communities. And of course, we have been carrying out participatory research, and then we also sort of intervene with the communities by introducing community savings and credit program just to help them to improve their shelter and livelihood opportunities. And also we are of course engaged in sharing of experiences and information of our work. Next slide. With regard to our involvement in this current research project, of course, we are as a implementing partner. We are basically assisting the project team in sort of identifying the key locations and developing contacts with the community leaders and link persons in the community, and also sort of we will be engaged in community, strengthening the community-based organization once the work is started. Then of course our process involves conducting participatory community workshops. Once the priorities are identified through these baseline surveys and things like that, then we will have more closer contact with the community, and then we will of course work along with the community to identify the community priorities with respect to these 6 service splits, and of course with the then of course our task is to implement 2 service improvement project intervention, which of course we will be implementing through the participation of the community and the other stakeholders, particularly service providing agencies and the local authority within which are related to those communities which we will be selecting. And then once the interventions are implemented, of course, improvement works are done. Parallelly, of course, we will be sort of developing a system along with the communities for operation and maintenance of those services which we build, and to link the communities with the service providing agencies and the local authority to ensure sustainability of the services. That is the process that we are expected to follow in our process. Next slide, please. Yes, this is just to highlight some of the past or recently completed work interventions in similar communities by SEVANATHA. In 2017, of course, after severe flood in one of the suburban area near Colombo, Colombo Division Secretary area. Of course, communities are affected due to the floods, and then we went to the community, and then of course, along with the community participation, of course, we built 30 individual toilets with the disposal system, and some access roads were improved, and then I mean, our work, of course, at about 3,000 people are directly and indirectly benefited through this. This intervention was, of course, implemented with the participation or with the support of the Divisional Secretary Office and the local level government official, and the directly with the community or beneficiary communities with their participation and contribution. And of course, we got some donor funding support for this, but we also sort of leveraged the community contribution in the process. And then we have implemented a demonstration project for sanitation improvement work in Namagampura settlement, which is one of the settlements that we have already selected for this research. And they are, of course, part of Namagampura community, consisting about 87 households. That is, we call a block within the larger community, one housing blocks. And then they, of course, through the funding support from Asian Development Bank and Colombo Municipal Council provided technical support, I mean, like design work of the storage system. And then SEVANATHA mobilized the community and the community development council was assigned the responsibility of doing the construction work by involving the labor and through their initiative. Of course, we Colombo Municipal Council and SEVANATHA jointly provided the technical support, and it was very successfully completed. And all the 87 families, they have built their individual toilets and connected to this improved storage system, and they are maintaining it well. And the CDC is very strongly committed to this work, and after the project was completed, they are maintaining a good relationship with the Colombo Municipal Council, especially in the drainage division. And when they are having any problem related to the newly built storage system, they used to approach Colombo Municipal Council for any support. And that is part of community empowerment. Actually, we see once we completed the job and hand it over to the community, and they are looking after it well, and they get the capacity to interact with the relevant government institution. Next slide, please. Yes. Of course, with the funding support of DFID UK and through Homeless International UK, that's international NGO, we built or implemented this a project called Community-led Solutions and Partnership in Settlement Upgrading in Colombo. under this project, of course, we have again identified 80 communities in the city of Colombo, covering about 12,000 families. And then we have, applied the community mobilization process there, like approaching the community, having, developing linkages with the community leaders, strengthening the community-based organization, which is community development council, and providing required training. And then we have linked up with the municipal council to get their technical support and other service provision agencies like water board, electricity board, and so on. And then through the community action plan in workshop, we have identified the community priority needs, and in certain communities, one or two service improvement projects, but minimum one, but maximum one or two, about two projects were implemented in these 80 settlements, which was a very successful project. And then there are also the method that we follow to the community-centered development approach, while getting the support of the other relevant stakeholder organizations, government organizations. And there, of course, we have, as I said, we successfully completed infrastructure improvement work in 80 communities. And then very recently, of course, last year, from 2016 to 2020, we have implemented a project called Community Mobilization Awareness and Behavior Change for under the Greater Colombo Water Supply project. There are also, of course, the main objective was to reduce the non-revenue water and then encourage people to get individual water connection, and wherever possible or wherever needed to keep the common water taps to be used by the community groups. And there, of course, there has been a community organization called Water User Group to look after, maintain, and then pay for water when they are using common taps. And then our task force, SEVANATHA was entrusted the task of identifying these water user groups and create awareness among the importance of savings water, reducing wastage, and paying for water, proper maintenance of common water taps and things like that. And then which involves water and sanitation both, sanitation practices and so on. There, of course, we have been working around 1,100 water user groups throughout the city. It was a very big project with a community mobilization team and key experts on water sanitation, gender, and training and community mobilization and so on. So we have very successfully completed this project, and then of course strengthen water user group, and then we were able to disconnect or reduce some of the unwanted common water taps, and then by saving water and in inculcating the people's habit of using water kind of meaningful way without wasting, and also sort of encouraging them to pay for water. So these are all, some examples where we have been working with community and with other relevant organizations, service providing organizations, and the process that we followed, of course, getting the communities involved in a process and then achieving the target, and then of course eventually giving the responsibility to the people to maintain this culture with I mean with some sense of ownership. So those are some I mean few projects which we could of course the experience of these would be useful for us to work on the current project and of course successfully implement proposed intervention under this project. Thank you. Hello.
Thank you, Mr. Chulratna. We have a little time to take up a few questions or comments if you have any, and the speakers can answer them.
Yes. Yes, we can share the slides if you wanted, anyone. Nandya. We will send it to you.
Are there more questions?
It need not be questions, maybe even comments are welcome.
Yeah, Rajit, do you want to answer this or shall I answer?
Sorry.
From Nandya?
No, you go ahead, Danesh. Yeah, I think it's better.
At the moment, Nandya, I mean, we just started this research. So for the moment, right now, we haven't come across anything that prevents interventions on housing across the sites. Nothing common, but as we go along, we hope to come across any blocks where the blockages are, especially that systems of provision, that approach. We're going to be using that, and we hope that'll answer what you just said, and we can actually share those findings with you. Rajit, do you want to take that, or Mr. Chulratna, even you can, I mean, Mr. Jayaratna?
Yeah, I think somebody from there should take it.
The question is, for the urban horizontal sites, is there any threat to relocation during the coming
across, no? Nirmani, we did not come across that information yet. We have heard that one of the sites could possibly, there could be relocation, but we haven't come across anything definite. Our in-depth interviews, which are supposed to start sometime, maybe in a few months, we can go, we can pursue that. in terms, Nandya, I'm just looking at your question. Nirman, hope you stay in touch with us. We will be reaching out to you. Okay, thank you, Nandya. Thank you for the heads up. What's the question from Kate? Kate, I'm looking at your question on the changing government policy. Is there any reason for this? Any pressure for changing government policy? I mean, you know, things are in motion, within motions at the moment with the pandemic, etc. We are monitoring what new policies the government will come out with. And of course, we're going to be working on the SOP with you. We will let you know. We are monitoring it, and we are.
Maybe Kate wants to know a little bit about historical changes as well, Tanish, like if Mr. Jarat is able to comment on that. Historical policy changes, which he mentioned in his presentation, I think.
Mr. Jayaratne, will you answer? Can you see the question? From
Yeah. I see the question. Actually, I'm not directly involved in the study. Mr. Chulratna and Malki is involved in the study, but as a organization, we actually proposed and also informed the government, you know, that to get the people more involved in this policy improvement work, as well as when they are going to do relocation and resettlement program, to consult the communities affected more on their issues. So as a part of our study, I think the Chula could add some more into this question, I think.
Okay, I mean, like, thank you, Jared. And with regard to government policies on housing, what we can see, of course, I mean, like from 1980s, latter part of 1978, starting from 1978 until 1994, of course, there have been more pro-poor and kind of people's participation in especially housing policy has been more prominent, much more prominent. And since 2005 and afterwards, especially in Colombo, of course, the basis of the policy basis, especially, has been changed from people's participation towards more planners and economists, of course, thinking, paying more attention to extracting or kind of realizing the land value, so value of land, rather than welfare aspects of people and social aspects of the communities and so on. So that may be the reason that despite the voices from many social organizations and social activists, the government was more interested. I mean, government has been more interested in putting up high-rise buildings, without paying more attention to the the serious concerns like O&M of these flats and the livelihood aspects of community and so on. Yes, obviously there's a policy shift, from participatory approach towards more professional dominance approach, which of course they rely on economic gains rather than pay more attention to serious social issues or social outcomes of this policy, housing policy, particularly, I mean, in the city of Colombo, providing housing for poor. That is visible, and I mean, we can see the impacts of it already in place, and maybe in years to come, especially the negative impact of the government policies pay more attention to economic or gain or economic aspect of land by forgetting about the social and community priorities. And so that is what I have to say on the housing policy with regard to provision of housing for poor in Colombo.
Chulesha, with regards to your question on are you all planning to evaluate different alternatives for infrastructure issues in underserved settlements? I mean, we will be, it's not, ours is not an evaluation. We will be gathering data, and the solution side will come from SEVANATHA. That's where that intersection happens between us, the researchers, and the practitioners. The solution, of course, there will be solutions that are outside the remit of our project because we just can't do it. But we will be proposing jointly. There will be suggestions on what could be done. Some of it may be quite practical, and some of it SEVANATHA may take up. Nirmani, your question, suggestion on the housing policy, 2017, it hasn't been taken seriously. Do we plan to push it? We will be, we are not pushing for anything, particular. We will be doing the research, and we will be sharing the findings, and hopefully those findings are in sync with what the housing policy has recommended. And if it is, then we will highlight that. And certainly we will recommend that this policy be taken up. Yeah. Thank you, Kate. Yes, Nandia, we will be in touch with you. We will, I'll actually write to you afterwards. Thank you, Chulesha.
So that brings us to the end of our session. On behalf of the project team, I would like to thank everyone for participating. As the speakers have mentioned, there will be occasions where we will reach out to you, and we look forward to keeping in touch. For any questions or updates on the research, please refer to the website links given or the contact details that has been given. So thanks again for your time and interest. I wish you a nice day. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.